Hi, I'm Tim, welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today we have a showdown between big bruisers, Leviathans of the Deep. It's the Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean versus the Rolex Sea Dweller 43. Let the games begin. In any contemporary battle between Omega and Rolex, we have to consider Omega the challenger. As impressive as the brand, its history, and its products are, Rolex is simply the industry juggernaut at the moment. And the Planet Ocean, as you see it right here, launched in 2016. 43.5mm in stainless steel. This is a case size that originally debuted in the Planet Ocean family as a bespoke case designed for the GMT Planet Ocean. Well, now available on the standard 600-meter diver. You can see the watch is impressive. On my 16-centimeter circumference wrist, the 43.5mm case wears fairly easily. It's not terribly broad from lug to lug, and this is where it has a real advantage over the Rolex. Let's give ourselves a little bit more contrast here. But the Rolex, with its solid end link, actually spans farther across the wrist. On the Omega, it's 49mm. On the Rolex, it's 50 if you include the lugs, but it's almost 54 if you include the solid end links. Now, where the Omega makes up some of the ground in bulk is thickness. The Omega is 16.3mm thick versus 15.2 for the Rolex. You do feel it and you do see it. You can really see to good effect, and I'll zoom out a little bit more so you can see everything in proportion to my wrist, but you really can feel and see the thickness of this Omega on the wrist. And because of the specific outcropping of the bezel, it's got a little bit of a cantilevered overhang. It's a bit more likely to catch a cuff than the Rolex is. Spacing between the lugs here, 21mm, and this is the watch on a 16-centimeter circumference wrist. I could recommend this watch for a wrist as small as about 14.5 centimeters circumference, but you got to be comfortable with the thickness, and it is a thick watch. Rolling back to the bracelet, you can see that it's a 3-link design, but it's in no way duplicative of the Rolex Oyster, and let's show them side by side. There's the Oyster. You can see it really has long, broad, and flat links, and then you can see the Omega design, which almost appears a little bit more like a hybrid of a sports bracelet and a dress bracelet, but it's all satin, whereas the Rolex is polished on its side. Now here they're the same. Screws for removable links, and there's a clasp on both, but whereas Rolex uses a lift lock and a clamshell system, Omega uses twin trigger. The Omega clasp internally gives you two options. You've got a push button slider that's 9.6mm of incremental adjustment, and then you've got a flip out extension that's beautifully machined and very solid. Everything about this clasp, its extension, its swing arm, and its shell is imposing, and I would even say vault-like. Think Mosler safe, and you got the basic idea. Helium escape valve on the flank, that's going to be no surprise to fans of Omega watches, but for a lot of folks that's going to be a sticking point versus the Rolex. You can see that there's a little bit of a sheer guard for the crown, but it's not quite the pronounced crown guard structure that you find on the Sea Dweller. The bezel is taller and less dramatically sloped than what you'll find on the Rolex. It's also color keyed to match the dial, and both are actually created from a proprietary blue ceramic. You can see zirconium oxide, the chemical symbol, just below the hands at center. The dial is of a very high grade with tri-Arabic numerals, applique Omega logo and marquee, as well as indices. It appears bottomless, glossy, shiny, and because of its ceramic qualities, it will never oxidize, tarnish, and it will resist chips or scratches if accidentally contacted by a watchmaker. The bezel insert is a combination of metal and ceramic. The metal, or liquid metal as Omega calls it, has been permanently bonded to the ceramic so they can never come apart. Ceramic, as with the Rolex, used for the insert, the bezel with a sharp and distinct detent. Have a listen. It moves easily, but you can see, line up the pearl with the broad arrow style minute hand, and you have a quick reference 60-minute countdown. Now the watch functions a bit differently than the Rolex. You can see there's no Cyclops eye here, but instead of a conventional quick set date, here we have a mobile time zone style hour hand that'll allow you to jump the date forward and backwards, while the watch actually keeps telling time. Screw down the crown, the watch 600 meters water resistant, coaxial chronometer in the back, Maytaz chronometer, so antimagnetic, 600 meters water resistant, 60-hour power reserve, coaxial escapement, twin mainspring barrels, silicon hairspring, full balance bridge with a free sprung balance, and a weird 25,200 vibration per hour beat rate that is rather distinctive of the co-axis. Now let's jump to the Rolex. This model was technically the 50th anniversary Sea Dweller. Some will call it the SD43, some folks will call it the Neo Red. It's all of these things. The watch pays homage to the original Sea Dweller reference, which launched in 1967, and this reference, launching at Bezel 2017, was an apt anniversary. 43mm in diameter. You might mistake it for a smaller deep sea, but it really wears closer in size, fit, and feel to the older 1/6 600, the 40 millimeter Sea Dweller that preceded it. It feels more like that than it does the Deep Sea. So the timepiece is relatively slender by the standards of this test, and certainly by the standards of the 17.7 millimeter Deep Sea. 15.2 millimeters thick, you can see the watch, 43 millimeters in diameter, is broad-shouldered. We mentioned the lug-to-lug dimension is larger on the Rolex than on the Omega. Let's get real close so you can see to good effect, but the lug-to-lug dimension is 50.3 millimeters and the horn-to-horn is 53.8, so almost 54 millimeters across the wrist. The spacing between the lugs is 22 millimeters, but I think the Rolex is less amenable aesthetically to an aftermarket strap than the Omega would be. Let's zoom out a little bit once more, give you one last overhead look, and you can see it's a full-figured watch. If you want the larger watch in the test, the Omega's thicker, but this one has more surface area on the wrist. As a result, it reads as a larger watch. Oyster bracelet, of course, solid end links, solid center links, all satin finish except for the flanks. Screws for removable links, and you can see them on both sides. There's a half link in there for precise sizing. You got a double locking system. You can see there is a beak and a hook internally, and you'll watch the lift lock click shut. You lift it to unlock, so it's actually got two locking systems. That's one, that's two. Pop it back open. You can see satin finish on the clasp, but all high polish inside. To remind you, this is a flagship piece. You have a Fliplock system that folds out, and then you have a Glidelock system. So you've got 20 millimeters of adjustment there in 2 millimeter increments, and then you have the flip out system, and that gives you, all told, in our Imperial system, roughly 2 inches of extension, or a little over 50 millimeters as I measure it. So it's an impressive system, and again, you do have more total extension here, as well as more incremental extension than you will find on the Omega. Close it all up, it's impressive how buttoned down and solid these components feel, despite the number of moving parts. Now you can see the watch features a helium escape valve in profile. Turn it on its end, you can't even see the valve. That's an aesthetic credit to Rolex designers versus the Omega. The crown guards here are more substantial. They do offer more protection to the crown. You can see, when comparing the watches, that the Rolex is substantially thinner, but also that the Omega's bezel is substantially higher over the case flank than the one on the Rolex. As a result, the one on the Rolex is less likely to catch your cuff. You can also see that it's more dramatically sloped. Now the action, I'm going to hold it up to the mic again. It's not that the Rolex has more detents. They're both 120 click bezels, but the Rolex just feels and sounds like money. It's sharp without being coarse, and it's smooth while remaining distinct. It sounds great, and Rolex clearly tested various different detents and spring systems to arrive at this eventuality. You have a ceramic insert on the bezel, but instead of the liquid metal inlays, here you have evacuated numerals and indices that are then filled with a platinum deposit. So by my book, that's an upscale way of doing things, and it adds a three-dimensional element of depth to the bezel. You have a sapphire capped pearl, which is actually a fairly complex sub-assembly in its own right, and you have that same wonderful 60-minute countdown. Now this dial, though it is black, has another quality at variance with the Omega. It is a semi-matte dial, which means it's designed to evoke the original 1665 1967 red Sea Dwellers. Now, of course, there was a single line red Sea Dweller before the double red, and this watch is designed to evoke that, but on a much larger scale. You have white gold hands, you have white gold indices. You can see that the dial is no-nonsense white on black printing with the exception of the Sea Dweller script, and this was the first Sea Dweller to feature a Cyclops eye. So love it or loathe it, it is very practical, it works well. Turn it on its end and you can see through the case back, well, you're going to have to imagine a cutaway. There is a Rolex caliber 3235 in there, 70-hour power reserve, full bridge, free sprung, Breguet overcoil, handmade, 6-position adjustment. The watch beats away at 28.8 stop seconds, quick set date, and the overcoil is an antimagnetic, though not amagnetic, blue oxidized niobium zirconium alloy. The watch is COSC certified, but Rolex goes one better, casing up the certified movement and testing it to no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per day, and that is the superlative chronometer terminology. The 70-hour power reserve, a big upgrade over the old Sea Dwellers and their 48-hour reserve. So let's talk about the advantages these two watches hold. With the Rolex, first and foremost, superior clasp. You get more incremental adjustment and you get more total adjustment. Moreover, the degree of quality of assembly and the double locking system won me over. The fact that there are this many moving parts and it still feels hewn from a single ingot of steel has won my favor. Now the timepiece also has a superior bezel feel, and that by a country mile. It feels better, it sounds better, and the depth of the wells filled with platinum gives this bezel a richer appearance, even though the zirconium oxide is no more scratch resistant than that of the Omega. Omega. I'll also note that this is a watch that in some regards is a little bit more heavy duty. Despite being a thinner timepiece, it's rated substantially deeper, 1220 meters versus 600, and the helium escape valve is completely flush with the case, so functionality doesn't suffer, but aesthetics are improved. The watch has name value. If status and stature are important to you, Rolex is a name that stands toe-to-toe with Richard Mille and Patek Philippe, and I have to say, given what you'll pay, even at a pre-owned markup for this watch, that is some heady company for a mass-produced timepiece. So if status and stature is part of the luxury watch experience you want name recognition, this is the one for you. Not for me, but it might be important to you. The one to buy new. Buy this watch new for $11,350. You can immediately turn around and private sell it for somewhere between $13,500 and $14,000. You can even buy the watch, own it for a year, and sell it and make a little bit of cash. So if you're on the wait list, don't get off. Stick around, it's worth the wait. Also worth mentioning, this watch does have some technical merits to its credit. The movement featuring the Rolex Chronergy escapement is just as sophisticated as the co-axial, and it gives you 70 hours of power reserve versus 60, and that COSC Plus superlative chronometer timing standard, well, Omega says that it meets the COSC standards, which is basically the ISO 3159, but that's -4 plus 6 over 24 hours. Rolex is attesting to -2 plus 2 per 24 hours and backing it with a half-decade warranty. Both watches with 5-year warranties, but only Rolex is promising specific accuracy on pain of a warranty claim. I'm also going to mention finally, just look, the Rolex is that much thinner. It's so much more slender on the wrist and more viable with a cuff as a result. It becomes a more versatile watch. Now let's talk about the Omega. It has some technical merits in its credit, but the first and foremost advantage is going to be the fact that the dial looks a lot more expensive. It has greater depth, luster, and contrast with more colors, and if you want to tone it down and go with a black dial, that's an option too. Not only does this dial look a little bit more lively and expensive than that of the Rolex, but you have many different size and color options when you buy a Planet Ocean 600 meter, so you're not stuck with the one case size. Rolex doesn't give you that flexibility with the Sea Dweller 43. The watch does feature some engineering advances over the Rolex. For example, you have the time zone feature that allows you to step the time without really changing any of the indications. You have a 2-barrel setup. So while the Rolex has 10 hours more power reserve, the twin barrel setup, you can see the 2 barrels underneath the bridge, they give you a more even torque release over 24 or 48 hours. So the Rolex is prone to losing amplitude after 24 hours, whereas the Omega is better at maintaining it because of the twin barrels. The coax remains absolutely exotic, and while it might not be any more sophisticated or accurate than Rolex's Chronergy, that escapement ties you to the legacy of George Daniels and Roger Smith, meaning it has more inherent cool factor. And the timepiece does have an amagnetic silicon hairspring. The Rolex is anti-magnetic. This one can withstand the full force and power of an MRI or a particle accelerator. No Cyclops eye. Can you see the numeral 4 there? Yup, so can I. And it's a monotone disc. So not only is it less obtrusive, but it even blends in better with the dial itself. And it's blue, not black, for a perfect match. Aesthetically, my preference. Pre-owned, these sell for $3,900 to $4,500, and new, they are $6,550. So if you're going to buy this watch, it's a better value either way, but if you buy pre-owned, you're talking about $4,000 to own a state-of-the-art modern dive watch from a great house, and there's less brand baggage. People are less likely to rob you for your watch, less likely to ask you out of the blue while you're dining with your date whether the watch is real or what it costs. That's worth something to me. And I'll mention that this is a watch with better lumen. You're going to see that in a moment. So which of these two would I prefer for my own wrist? I'm going to be honest, I liked the Rolex more. At first, I went into this assuming I would pick the Omega. While I like being low-key, I like the coax, some of the tech advantages, the color options, I like being a more low-profile brand, but I was more impressed by the feel and the look, the solidity and refinement of the Rolex. All the qualities that don't come across when you're reading a tech table or a stat sheet simply overwhelmed me, and the Rolex struck me as a charismatic as well as technically competent champion. This one is not just the winner by a technical knockout, it is the crowd favorite. You guys let me know in the box below which of these you would throw on your wrist, even if price is no object. The winner by amount of lume as well as contrast of lume. Note the distinct bezel pearl and minute hand in green on the Omega, and then on the Rolex it's all monotone. So the Omega by a narrow margin, more and better lume.